The clock on the wall seemed to be moving slower than usual. It was one of those nights where time felt thick, like trying to walk through deep water. The restaurant was mostly empty now. The loud, chaotic noise of the dinner rush had faded away, leaving behind just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of a spoon hitting a plate. The young woman leaned against the counter near the kitchen pass. She let out a long breath that she felt like she had been holding in for hours. Her feet throbbed inside her non-slip shoes. It wasn't a sharp pain, but a dull, heavy ache that spread up her calves and settled in her lower back. She reached down to rub her ankle through the fabric of her black work pants. It was the same routine every night. The rush comes, you run, you sweat, you smile until your face hurts, and then everyone leaves, and you are left with the silence and the mess. She looked around the room. Only 2 tables were still occupied. In the back corner, an older man was slowly drinking a cup of coffee, reading a newspaper that looked like it had been read a dozen times before. Near the window, a young couple sat close together, speaking in whispers, their half-eaten dessert sitting between them. They were in their own world, and she was glad. It meant she didn't have to check on them every 5 minutes. The air in the place smelled of fried food, coffee beans, and the lemon-scented cleaning spray she kept in her apron pocket. It was a smell that stuck to your clothes and your hair, no matter how long you showered. Sometimes, she felt like she would never really smell like fresh air again. She pushed herself off the counter and grabbed a gray plastic tub from underneath the register. It was time to start the side work. This was the part of the job that no one saw. The customers saw the smiling face bringing the burger, but they didn't see the silent wandering through the dining room, collecting leftover napkins, scraping gum off the underside of tables. And stacking chairs, she walked over to a table that had just been vacated. It was a mess. There were crumpled sugar packets on the floor and a puddle of syrup where a stack of pancakes used to be. She sighed, a soft sound that no one heard, and began to wipe it down. The cloth moved in circles. Wipe, rinse, wipe, rinse. It was a meditation of sorts. Her mind drifted while her hands did the work. She thought about the rent that was due in 3 days. She thought about the leaky faucet in her apartment that she kept forgetting to fix. She thought about how heavy her eyes felt. As she worked, she moved closer to the front corner of the restaurant. This was the quietest part of the room, tucked away from the entrance. It was also where it sat, the piano. It was a big, heavy, upright piano. It wasn't a grand, shiny instrument that you would see in a concert hall. It was old. The wood was scratched, and the finish had faded from a rich brown to a dull, dusty color. Most people walked right past it without even giving it a second look. To the regular customers, it was just another piece of furniture, like the potted plant in the corner or the coat rack by the door sometimes. The staff would throw their jackets on top of it during a busy shift. Other times, they would stack extra menus or boxes of straws on the bench. It was just a surface for holding things. But every time she walked past it, she slowed down. She didn't know why. It wasn't like she was a famous musician or anything. She hadn't taken a lesson in years. But there was something about the shape of it, the way it sat there silently. It always pulled at her. She finished wiping the table and walked over to the piano to straighten the chairs around it. She ran her finger along the top of the instrument. It came away dusty. She rubbed her thumb and forefinger together, watching the gray dust disappear into her skin. "Forgot to dust this again, didn't we?" she whispered to herself. Her voice sounded strange in the quiet room. It was louder than she expected. She grabbed a clean napkin from the pile in her tub and gently wiped the dust off the top of the piano. Underneath the grime, the wood felt cool and smooth. She imagined what it looked like when it was new. Who had played it first? Was it a happy family in a living room? Did a child practice scales on it every day after school? Or had it always lived in a restaurant, listening to conversations and watching people eat? The bench was pulled out slightly, leaving just enough room for someone to sit if they wanted to. She looked around the room again. The older man in the corner was turning a page. The couple by the window was laughing softly at a joke. The bartender was in the back, washing glasses and singing quietly to the radio. No one was watching her. She stood there for a moment, just letting the silence wash over her. The restaurant felt different at this time of night. During the day, It was bright and noisy and demanding. But now, in the shadows cast by the dimmed lights, it felt peaceful. It felt like the world had stopped spinning for just a few minutes, giving her a chance to catch her breath. She looked down at her hands. They were rough and red from the hot water and the cleaning chemicals. Her nails were kept short because it was easier to work that way. These were hands that carried heavy trays and scrubbed counters. They didn't look like hands that played music, but deep down, under the tiredness and the smell of grease, she could still feel it. It was a tiny little spark. She remembered sitting at a keyboard in her parents' house when she was a little girl. She remembered how the notes fit together, how playing a song felt like telling a story without using any words. She remembered closing her eyes and letting her fingers find their way home on the keys. Life had gotten in the way, as it always does. There were bills to pay, jobs to work, and 1,000 other things that seemed more important than sitting at a piano. The music had been packed away in a box in her mind. Right next to the dreams of being a teacher and the plans to travel the world, she glanced at the keys. They were slightly yellowed, some of them chipped at the edges. It looked like they hadn't been pressed down in a very long time. It felt like the piano was sleeping, waiting for someone to wake it up. She set down her cleaning bucket. She didn't plan to play a concert. She didn't even know if she could remember a whole song. She just felt the need to sit. Just for a minute. Just to rest her legs and pretend that she wasn't a waitress who was covered in syrup smell. Just to be someone else for a few seconds. She sat down on the bench. It made a tiny creaking sound, protesting under her weight. She straightened her apron self-consciously, even though no one was looking. She placed her hands in her lap. She felt a little ridiculous, sitting there in her work uniform, staring at a dusty old piano. But she also felt a strange flutter in her chest. It was a mix of nervousness and excitement, a feeling she hadn't had in a long time. The air around her seemed to change. It got quieter. The noise of the bartender, the couple, and the traffic outside faded into the background. All she could hear was her own breathing, and the silent call of the 88 black and white keys in front of her. She lifted her right hand. It hovered over the keys for a moment, shaking just a little bit. She was afraid to touch them. What if she sounded terrible? What if she made a fool of herself? What if she had forgotten everything? But the pull was too strong. The need to hear a sound, any sound, that was beautiful and pure, was stronger than her fear. Her fingers were inches away from the ivory. The wait was over. The ordinary night was about to tilt on its axis, though she didn't know it yet. She took a deep breath, held it for a second, and let her fingers fall. Her fingers trembled just a little as they made contact with the cold ivory. It was a strange feeling, touching something so personal and so technical after a day of touching things that were temporary and disposable plastic cups, paper napkins, greasy menus. The key was smooth, worn down by years of other fingers pressing down on it. But to her, it felt like touching a live wire. She didn't press down hard. She just let the weight of her hand rest on the note. A single low sound hummed out of the back of the piano. It was a deep, vibrating note that seemed to travel through the wooden bench and up her spine. It wasn't perfectly tuned. There was a slight wavering in the pitch that gave it a rustic, tired character, almost like the piano itself was sighing. She flinched slightly, pulling her hand back as if she had touched a hot stove. She looked over her shoulder toward the kitchen. The door was swung open and she could see the bartender wiping down the counter. He hadn't looked up. The couple in the corner was still whispering, lost in their own world. No one had told her to stop. No one had cared. The fear of getting in trouble began to mix with a different feeling. It was a rush, doing something you aren't supposed to do. Even something as harmless as playing the piano during a shift brings a certain kind of electricity. It wakes you up. She turned back to the keys. Her heart was beating a little faster now, pushing the tiredness out of her veins. She looked at her hands again. They looked so out of place, hovering over the keyboard. Under her fingernails, there was a faint trace of tomato sauce from the dinner rush that she hadn't been able to scrub away. But she didn't wipe them on her apron this time. She just let them be. She placed her hand back on the keys, this time a little more confidently. She found a C chord. Her thumb, middle finger, and pinky pressed down together. Hum. The sound was richer this time. It filled the empty space around her. It wasn't just a noise. It was a presence. It was amazing to her that 3 simple strings vibrating inside a wooden box could make a sound that felt so big. It felt louder than the dishwasher, louder than the traffic outside, louder than the voice in her head that told her she was too tired to keep going. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Then her left hand found a bass note, and her right hand began to move. It started slowly, a simple melody. She didn't even think about what she was playing. It wasn't a song she had practiced recently. It was just something that her fingers remembered from a lifetime ago. It was a scale that turned into a tune that turned into a story. Her muscle memory took the wheel, and her brain just went along for the ride. At first, she was stiff. Her shoulders were up by her ears, waiting for someone to yell at her to get back to work. But as the notes flowed, one into the other, she felt the tension in her body begin to melt. It started in her shoulders, dropping down an inch. Then it moved to her neck, loosening the tight muscles that had been knotted up all day. She closed her eyes for a second, just to let the feeling wash over her. When she closed her eyes, the restaurant disappeared. She didn't smell the old coffee anymore. She didn't see the empty plates or the dusty floor. She was floating in the sound. It was a feeling of pure, unfiltered freedom. She wasn't the girl who couldn't pay her phone bill. She wasn't the waitress who had been stiffed on a tip earlier that afternoon. She was just a creator, making something beautiful out of silence. The tempo picked up. Her fingers started to move a little faster. They stumbled once, hitting a wrong note that clanged out of tune. Her eyes shot open, panic flashing across her face. But she didn't stop. She kept going, correcting the mistake with the next note. That was the rule she had learned as a kid. Never stop playing. If you make a mistake, make it sound like it was supposed to be there. Keep moving forward. She realized then that she didn't care if it was perfect. It didn't matter if the piano was out of tune or if she was rusty. It mattered that she was doing it. She was breaking the monotony of her life, even if just for 5 minutes. The music began to swell. It was a melancholy kind of song, the kind that makes you feel sad, but in a good way. Like watching the rain fall when you are safe inside a warm house. The notes drifted up toward the high ceiling, bouncing off the mirrors and the paintings on the walls. Slowly, the atmosphere in the room began to change. It was subtle at first. The bartender, who had been aggressively scrubbing a glass, slowed down. The rhythm of his arm matched the rhythm of the music. He didn't realize he was doing it, but his shoulders relaxed and the scowl on his face softened. He turned his head slightly, listening. The couple by the window stopped talking. The man lifted his head, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. He looked around, trying to find the source of the music. When he saw the young woman in the corner, hunched over the old piano, his expression changed from confusion to curiosity. He nudged his partner, and they both turned to look. Even the old man in the back with the newspaper lowered his paper. He had heard this song before, maybe a long time ago. It reminded him of something, a memory tucked away in the back of his mind. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, just listening to the sound weave through the empty tables. But the young woman didn't notice any of this. She was in her own world. As she played, the music became more complex. Her left hand was walking up the bass keys, adding a heartbeat to the melody. Her right hand was dancing, hitting the keys with a firmness that surprised her. She was hitting them harder now, putting her anger and her frustration into the instrument. Every bad tip, every rude customer, every night spent worrying about money, it was all flowing out of her fingertips and into the piano. The piano was taking it all and giving her back something beautiful in return. It was a trade. She gave the machine her pain, and the machine gave her melody. She started to sway back and forth on the bench. Her body was moving with the music now, completely in sync. The heavy black apron felt lighter. The shoes that hurt her feet didn't matter anymore. She was tapping her foot on the pedal, keeping the time. The damper pedal opened up the strings, letting the sound sustain and ring out.
Oh, yes.
Filling every corner of the room with a golden haze of sound. It was a transformative moment. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She was a musician. It didn't matter that she wasn't famous. It didn't matter that she was playing in a diner in the middle of the night. Art isn't about where you are. It's about what you give. And right now, she was giving everything she had. She hit a series of high notes, trilling down the scale. The sound was like water flowing over rocks. It was crisp and clear. She opened her eyes and looked at the keys, but she didn't really see them. She saw the notes in her head, floating in the air. She felt the vibration of the strings humming against her chest. She was breathing hard. But it wasn't the tired, heavy breathing from work. It was the excited breath of exertion. Her fingers were starting to warm up, moving faster and with more precision. The rusty feeling was gone. They knew exactly where to go. It was like meeting an old friend on the street and realizing you hadn't missed a beat. The song was building to a climax. The notes were getting louder, more urgent. She was leaning forward now, her hair falling over her face, ignoring it completely. She was attacking the keys, not in a violent way, but with a passionate intensity. She was reclaiming a piece of herself that she had lost. The room was completely silent now, except for the music. The clinking of forks had stopped. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade away. The only thing that existed in the world was the sound coming from that dusty corner. It was as if the entire restaurant was holding its breath, waiting to see where she would take them next. She took a deep breath, her fingers poised for the next phrase, ready to pour the rest of her soul into the instrument. The wait was over. The spell was fully cast. She wasn't just touching the piano anymore. The piano was touching everyone in the room. Asterisk, the sound that filled the room wasn't just a collection of notes anymore. It had changed. It wasn't a simple practice run or a hesitant test of the keys. It had transformed into something living and breathing. The music swelled, growing louder and more confident, filling every dusty corner of the restaurant. It climbed up the walls and hid in the rafters. Chasing away the silence that usually lived there, the young woman felt a change happen inside her chest. It started as a small spark and then turned into a warm fire. Her back, which had been bent over tables and trays all day, straightened up. Her shoulders rolled back, opening up her lungs. She wasn't the tired employee anymore. She wasn't worrying about the rent or the dirty dishes in the sink. In that moment, she was someone else entirely. She was a musician. She was a storyteller. And the story she was telling was pouring out of her fingers. Her eyes were closed now, tight shut, blocking out the visual world so she could focus entirely on what she was hearing. She didn't need to see the keys. Her hands knew where to go. It was a strange feeling, like her fingers had a mind of their own. They moved with a speed and grace that shocked her. She felt the rough calluses on her fingertips press into the ivory, but they didn't feel like hard workers' hands now. They felt like instruments of expression. The melody she was playing was complicated. It wasn't a happy, bouncy tune. It was deep and serious, with a lot of minor chords that made your heart ache a little bit. It sounded like a memory of something you lost a long time ago. As her right hand played the weaving, complicated tune up high, her left hand was down low, playing a steady, marching rhythm. It was like a heartbeat underneath the words of a poem. She swayed slightly with the music, her body rocking back and forth on the bench. The heavy apron tied around her waist didn't feel like a uniform anymore. It was just part of the movement. Her black shoes, which had been hurting her all night, were tapping the sustain pedal softly. Press release. Press release. Each time she pressed the pedal, the damper inside the piano lifted, and the strings vibrated freely, letting the sound ring out and hang in the air. The vibration of the music was so strong that she could feel it. In the wooden bench beneath her, it buzzed against her legs, traveling up her body. It felt like the piano was humming right along with her. It was a connection between two objects, the person and the machine. It felt almost magical. But the most incredible thing wasn't happening on the bench. It was happening in the room around her. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted completely. The air felt different. It felt thicker, charged with an energy that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. The tired, bored feeling of a late Tuesday night had vanished. The couple sitting by the window had completely stopped moving. The man who had been checking his phone every 5 minutes put it face down on the table. He didn't care about his emails anymore. He was staring at the piano, a look of pure wonder on his face. The woman he was with had her hand resting over her heart. Her eyes were closed, and a single tear had escaped and was rolling down her cheek. The music was touching them in a place they didn't expect. It was reminding them of something private, something shared between them. They held hands across the table, squeezing tight, anchoring each other in the beautiful sound. Even the bartender, who had seen everything in this place, drunk customers, arguments, broken glass, had stopped moving. He stood behind the bar with a glass towel in his hand, frozen. He was looking at the young woman with a new kind of respect. He had known her for months as a quiet worker who did her job and went home. He had no idea she carried this kind of fire inside her. He felt a strange sense of pride watching her break out of her shell. He realized that he didn't really know the people he worked with. Not really. Everyone has a hidden world inside them. In the back corner, the old man with the newspaper had folded it up completely. He took off his glasses and polished them slowly, his eyes never leaving the corner of the room. To him, the music sounded like the past. It sounded like a dance hall from 50 years ago. It reminded him of being young, of wearing a sharp suit, and of spinning a girl around a dance floor until the room spun. He smiled, a sad, gentle smile, tapping his fingers on the table. He was transported back in time, carried there by the sound of a dusty piano in a quiet restaurant. The music continued to build. The young woman's hands were moving faster now. The notes were cascading down the keyboard like water flowing over a waterfall. It was a rush of sound, fast and exciting, but never losing control. She was pushing the tempo, making the song race forward. Her breathing changed to match the intensity of the song. She was taking quick, sharp breaths through her nose. A bead of sweat formed on her forehead, not from the heat of the kitchen, but from the heat of the performance. She could feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins. It was a rush unlike anything she had felt in a long time. It was better than a good tip. It was better than a compliment from a boss. It was the feeling of being completely, totally alive. She hit a wrong note in the middle of a fast run. It was a jarring sound, a clink that didn't belong. In the past, she would have stopped. She would have apologized and felt embarrassed. But tonight, she didn't stop. She didn't even flinch. She kept playing, weaving the wrong note into the melody until it sounded like it was supposed to be there. That was the lesson of life, she realized in that split second. You make mistakes, but you have to keep going. You have to make the mistake part of the song. The emotion inside her was rising. She wasn't just playing notes. She was pouring out everything she had been holding back. She played the frustration of living paycheck to paycheck. She played the loneliness of coming home to an empty apartment. She played the hope that one day things would be different. All of those feelings were turned into sound, flying out of the piano and filling the room. The song reached its highest point. The volume grew, the sound becoming rich and full, filling the entire space. She was playing with power now, attacking the keys with force, making the piano sing out loud and bold. It was a sound of triumph, a sound of someone saying, "I am here." She could feel the energy of the room pushing back on her. The silence of the audience wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was a focused silence. It was a heavy listening silence that gave her energy. She could feel their attention like a spotlight shining on her, even though the lights were dim. They were with her. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was playing for the couple in love, for the old man remembering his youth, for the bartender finding a moment of peace. She was giving them a gift, and they were accepting it. Her fingers were starting to get tired. The muscles in her forearms were burning slightly, but she welcomed the feeling. It was a good pain. It meant she was working hard at something she loved. The tips of her fingers were tingling from the impact of the keys. The melody began to soften again. The rush of fast notes slowed down. The intensity dropped from a shout to a whisper. She moved her hands to the lower end of the keyboard, playing deep, resonant chords that echoed like a bell in a church. The mood of the song shifted from excitement to a gentle peace. It was like the sun going down on a long day. It's quiet and calm. She played a series of high, delicate notes, like stars twinkling in the dark sky. They were quiet, so quiet that the people at the tables had to lean in to hear. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, afraid that if anyone moved, the spell would break. The young woman felt a sense of calm wash over her. The anger and the frustration were gone, used up by the music. She felt light. The weight of the world had lifted off her shoulders, leaving her feeling weightless. She was floating in the sound, safe and protected. It was the closest thing to heaven she could imagine. Right there on a scratched wooden bench in a restaurant that smelled like coffee, she wasn't thinking about what to play next. Her hands were just moving, finding the notes one by one, creating a new path through the song. It was an improvisation, a conversation between her and the piano. She would play a question, and the piano would answer. She would play a statement, and the piano would agree. The air in the room felt warm and golden, even under the harsh fluorescent lights. For a few minutes, this wasn't a tired diner in the city. It was a sanctuary. It was a place where time stopped, and people could just feel. The magic was real now. It wasn't just a nice idea. It was a living thing that lived in the space between the notes. Connecting everyone in the room, she took a deep breath and let her fingers rest on the final chord, letting it hang in the air, vibrating and slowly fading away, promising that the song wasn't really over. It was just pausing. The silence that followed the soft, fading notes was heavy, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when a room full of people realizes they are witnessing something special. The air seemed to vibrate with the memory of the sound, like the ripples on a pond after a stone has been thrown, in that quiet moment.
Oh.
The transformation of the restaurant was complete. It was no longer a greasy spoon with flickering lights and sticky tables. It had become a sanctuary. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead seemed to dim on their own, softening the edges of the room. The smell of fried food and coffee was gone, replaced by the phantom scent of rain and old memory. Everyone in the room was holding their breath, afraid that if they let it out, the magic would disappear. The young woman at the piano didn't stop. Her hands hovered for just a heartbeat before diving into the next phrase. This time, the music changed direction. It wasn't sad anymore. It wasn't just a memory. It became a story of the present moment. Her fingers moved with a new kind of energy, striking the keys with a firm, rhythmic purpose. It was a sound of resilience, of getting up when you fall down, finding beauty in the hard work of everyday life. The melody picked up speed. It was a rolling, driving rhythm that made you want to tap your foot. It sounded like a train moving down the tracks, steady and unstoppable. As the tempo grew, her entire body moved with it. She wasn't sitting still like a statue in a museum. She was leaning into the piano, swaying from side to side, her head bobbing slightly to the beat. The couple by the window was completely mesmerized. The woman had stopped crying, but she still held her hand over her heart. She was looking at the musician, but her eyes were unfocused, seeing something else. The music was taking her back to a time when she was young and hopeful. Before life became about bills and schedules and stress, she squeezed her husband's hand, and he squeezed back harder than usual. They didn't need to speak. In the span of a few chords, they remembered why they fell in love. They remembered the dreams they used to share. The music was acting like a bridge, connecting them back to their best selves. The man reached across the table and brushed a stray hair away from his wife's face. It was a small gesture, something he hadn't done in years. The music had made him soft again. It had cracked the shell of his busy, tired mind and let the affection pour out. They weren't just two people eating dessert anymore. They were partners, listening to the soundtrack of their lives. Near the back, the old man wasn't looking at the piano anymore. He was looking straight ahead, his eyes seeing through the walls of the restaurant. The driving rhythm of the music made him think of the factories he used to work in, the noise of the machines, the rhythm of a hard day's work. But instead of tiring him out, the music made him proud. It celebrated the work. It celebrated the endurance of people like him. He nodded his head slowly, keeping time with the beat. A faint smile played on his lips. He felt seen. He felt like this song was played just for him, to honor the years he had put in. Even the bartender, who was usually so cynical and focused on getting the place closed up, felt a lump form in his throat. He watched the young woman's back. He could see the muscles in her arms working under the fabric of her shirt. He could see the tension in her shoulders releasing with every note. He realized how wrong he had been about her. He thought she was just another person passing through, another face in the crowd. But now, he saw the fire inside her. He saw the discipline it took to play like that. He felt a sudden, intense respect for her. He stopped drying the glass and just leaned on the bar, giving her his full attention. It was the least he could do. The music continued to swell. It was filling every inch of the room. The sound bounced off the mirrors and the polished floor, creating a rich, full atmosphere that wrapped around everyone like a warm blanket. The young woman was lost in it. She wasn't thinking about what she was playing. She wasn't worrying if her fingers were fast enough or if the song was too long. She was just letting the music flow through her. It was a feeling of pure freedom. She felt a strange connection to the people in the room, even though she couldn't see them. She could feel their presence. She could feel their attention like a physical weight resting on her shoulders. But it wasn't a heavy weight. It was a supportive weight. It was holding her up. She was pouring her soul out into the room, and they were drinking it in. It was an exchange of energy. She gave them her truth. They gave her their focus. She hit a series of high notes that were sharp and bright, cutting through the low bass line. They sounded like bells ringing out on a clear morning. The sound was so pure that it gave everyone goosebumps. The couple shivered. The old man rubbed his arms. The bartender felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It was the sound of hope. It was the sound of something new breaking through. The young woman's face was wet with sweat now. A strand of hair had fallen loose from her ponytail and was sticking to her cheek. She didn't brush it away. She didn't care how she looked. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She wasn't the tired girl with the sore feet. She was a creator. She was powerful. She was in control of this moment, and she was taking everyone along for the ride. The music began to build toward a climax. The notes became faster, more intricate. Her left hand was jumping across the keys, playing a complex pattern that drove the song forward. Her right hand was playing a melody that soared up high, full of longing and passion. It was a conversation between the two hands, a debate between the hard reality of the bass and the dreamy hope of the melody. The room felt electric. The air was charged with emotion. It felt like anything could happen. The boundary between the ordinary world and the world of art had completely dissolved. For these few minutes, no one was worried about their problems. The couple wasn't worried about their bills. The old man wasn't worried about his health. The bartender wasn't worried about the inventory. They were just there. They were present. They were alive. The young woman took a deep breath and slammed her hands down on the keys for a big, loud chord. The sound rang out like a gunshot, but it wasn't violent. It was triumphant. It was a declaration. It was the sound of saying, "I am here, and I have something to say." Then the music softened again. She took the energy down from the shout to a whisper. She played a gentle, cascading run of notes that trickled down the keyboard like water falling over smooth stones. It was a release. It was the feeling of letting go of all the tension and just floating. She looked down at her hands. They were moving so fast, they were almost a blur. She couldn't believe it was her doing this. It felt like the music was playing her rather than the other way around. She felt like a hollow reed, and the music was the wind blowing through her. The couple was holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. They had forgotten about their coffee. They had forgotten about the drive home. They were just listening, caught in the spell of the moment. The woman looked at the musician and saw herself. She saw the dreams she had given up on. She saw the potential that still lived inside her, buried under years of routine. It made her want to go home and do something creative. It made her want to feel alive again. The bartender wiped a tear from his eye quickly, hoping no one would see. He wasn't a crier. He was a tough guy. But this music, it got under his skin. It reminded him of being a kid, listening to his mother play the old radio. It reminded him of a time when the world felt big and full of promise. The young woman felt the song winding down. She knew the end was coming. She could feel the story reaching its conclusion. She played one final, beautiful chord that lingered in the air, vibrating with warmth and love. She held the key down, letting the sound sustain until it faded into nothingness. Her hands lifted off the keys and rested in her lap. The silence that returned was different now. It wasn't the tired silence at the beginning of the night. It was a sacred silence. It was a silence filled with the echoes of what had just happened. It was the silence you hear after a thunderstorm. When the world is fresh and clean, the magic hung in the air, invisible but undeniable. No one moved. No one spoke. They just sat there, letting the moment last as long as possible. They knew that once they moved, once they clapped or coughed or picked up their fork, the spell would be broken. So they stayed still, holding on to the feeling. Connected to each other by the sound of a piano in a dark room, the final chord seemed to hang in the air for a long time. Vibrating against the walls and the ceiling, refusing to let go, it was a deep, resonant sound that felt like a heartbeat. For a few seconds, nobody in the restaurant moved. Nobody breathed. It was as if the entire world had stopped spinning just to listen to the silence left behind. Then, slowly, the spell began to break. The young woman opened her eyes. The haze of the music lifted, and the room came back into focus. The harsh light of the exit sign above the door glowed red. The refrigerators in the kitchen hummed their steady electric song. The reality of where she was, a tired diner in the middle of the night. Rushed back in, she pulled her hands away from the keys and placed them gently in her lap. Her fingers were tingling, a little numb from the effort. She looked down at them, almost surprised to see them attached to her wrists. They looked the same as they had 10 minutes ago. They were still the hands of a worker, rough and red. But they felt different. They felt lighter, as if they had just put down a heavy load they had been carrying for years. A soft sound came from the front of the room. It was the clapping of hands. It started with the older man in the corner. He wasn't clapping loudly or wildly. He was clapping slowly, with a deep, rhythmic respect. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was like a heartbeat of approval. The couple by the window joined in. The woman was smiling, her eyes shining, clapping her hands together in front of her chest. Her husband was clapping too, nodding his head with a look of genuine admiration. Even the bartender, standing behind the bar with a dish towel in his hand, started to clap. He had a look on his face that was a mix of shock and pride. The young woman jumped slightly at the sound of the applause. It wasn't a loud, roaring stadium noise, but in the quiet of the empty restaurant, it sounded like a thunderstorm. A hot blush rushed to her cheeks. The confidence she had felt just seconds ago while playing vanished, replaced by a sudden, shy embarrassment. She had forgotten they were there. For a few glorious minutes, she had been alone in the universe with the music. Now she realized she was just a waitress in a wrinkled uniform, sitting at a piano she wasn't supposed to touch. She quickly stood up from the bench, smoothing down the front of her apron. It was a nervous habit, trying to make herself look presentable, trying to put the uniform back on as a shield. She felt small again, shrinking under the gaze of the customers. She looked at the floor, then at the bartender, and then gave a quick, awkward little nod. She didn't say anything. She didn't know what to say. Thank you felt too formal, and sorry felt wrong. She reached down and gently closed the keyboard cover. It made a soft thud as it settled into place. It was a final sound. The instrument was asleep again. The magic box was closed. The applause died down, but the energy in the room had changed completely. The air wasn't heavy with tiredness anymore. It felt light. It felt charged. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a comfortable silence, the kind you share with good friends. The young woman bent down to pick up her plastic cleaning bucket. She picked up the gray rag she had dropped on the floor. She was the worker again. She had tables to wipe and floors to sweep. The music was over. It was time to go back to work. But as she stood there, bucket in hand, she realized something felt different. Her feet didn't hurt as much. Her back didn't feel as tight. The grayness of the world seemed to have a little more color in it. It was like she had taken a vacation to a beautiful place and come back renewed. Even though she had never left the corner, she walked past the couple near the window. As she passed their table, the woman looked up. Their eyes met. In the past, this customer would have looked right through her, seeing only a person to bring coffee. But now, the woman really saw her. She saw the person who had made her feel something deep and real a few minutes ago. That was beautiful, the woman said softly. Her voice was sincere. Really, truly beautiful. Thank you. The young woman stopped. She gripped the handle of her bucket tight. She felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't used to being thanked for being herself. I'm sorry if I disturbed you, she mumbled, her voice quiet. No, the man said, shaking his head. You didn't disturb us. You made the night. It was the best part of our week. The young woman offered a small, shy smile. It wasn't the fake customer service smile she used all day. It was a real smile, one that reached her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. She hurried away to the next table, feeling their warmth following her. She went behind the counter to grab some clean glasses. The bartender was there, stacking cups. He looked at her as she walked up. He didn't make a joke. He didn't ask her why she wasn't sweeping. He just looked at her with a new kind of respect. I didn't know you could play like that, he said. His voice was serious. How come you never told us? She shrugged, looking down at the glasses in her hands. I don't know, she said. I guess I just didn't think it mattered. It's been a long time. It matters, the bartender said firmly. That was something else. You should play more often. Whenever you want. Seriously. The boss might even like it. Might bring in more tips. She laughed a little, a short, soft sound. Maybe, she said. But she knew she wouldn't play again tomorrow. It wasn't about making it a habit. It was about the moment. It was special because it didn't happen all the time. She finished her side work, wiping down the counters and sweeping the floor. The motions were the same as always, but her mind was elsewhere. She was still humming the melody she had played. She could feel the ghost of the keys under her fingertips. The night didn't feel like a grind anymore. It felt like a memory she would keep forever. The couple eventually stood up to leave. They put on their coats and gathered their things. As they walked past the piano on their way to the door, the woman stopped. She reached out and touched the wood of the piano gently, like she was touching a holy object. Then she looked over at the young woman one last time and waved. The wave wasn't for the waitress. It was for the artist. The older man in the back was finishing his coffee. He folded his newspaper and tucked it under his arm. As he walked by the counter to pay, he nodded to her. Nice touch, he grumbled softly. Real nice. It wasn't a long speech, but coming from him, it meant everything. Finally, it was time to close. The chairs were turned upside down on the tables. The floor was clean. The lights were dimmed. The bartender counted the cash in the register. The young woman clocked out. The sound of the time machine printing her slip sounding loud in the quiet room. She took off her apron and hung it on the hook in the back room. She put on her coat and wrapped a scarf around her neck. She picked up her bag. She felt tired, but it was a good tired. It was the feeling you get after a long hike or a hard day at the beach. Her body was exhausted, but her spirit was full. She walked out of the restaurant and into the night air. It was cold, crisp, and sharp against her face. The street was quiet, with just the distant hum of cars passing on the main road. The streetlights cast long yellow shadows on the sidewalk. She took a deep breath, inhaling the cold air. It smelled like rain and pavement. It was the smell of the real world. But as she walked toward the bus stop, she realized she wasn't walking the same way she usually did. She wasn't dragging her feet. She was walking with a little bit of a rhythm, a little bit of a bounce. She looked at her hands as she walked. They were red from the cold, stuffed deep into her coat pockets. But she knew what they could do. She knew that underneath the ordinary gloves of an ordinary life, there was something extraordinary waiting to come out. The piano was sitting in the dark restaurant, silent and dusty again. By tomorrow morning, customers would put their coffee cups on it. Servers would throw their jackets on top of it. It would go back to being just a piece of furniture. But the young woman knew the truth. It wasn't just furniture. It was a sleeping giant, and she knew that she wasn't just a tired waitress either. She was a person who could create magic. She was a person who could change the atmosphere of her room with just 2 hands and a bucket of courage. The bus pulled up to the curb, its lights cutting through the darkness. The doors hissed open. She climbed on and took a seat near the window. As the bus pulled away from the curb, She looked back at the restaurant one last time. It looked small and quiet from the outside, but she knew what had happened inside. She knew that for a few minutes, an ordinary night had turned into a fairy tale. She leaned her head against the cold glass of the window and closed her eyes. In the darkness of her mind, she could still hear the music. It was playing for her now, a soft, gentle lullaby to carry her home. The song was over, but the feeling would stay with her forever. And whenever life felt too heavy or too gray, she would remember this night. She would remember that she held the keys to her own magic. She smiled as the bus rumbled down the street carrying her home. The night was ordinary again, but she was not.